Welcome to another edition of the Veterans in Conversation, brought to you by the Power of Story. Today, we are on episode 3 of season 2, and we have a tremendous guest for us, a guy who served as a Marine. So that's probably all I really need to say, but I'll say a little bit more. So we have Ryan Roberts with us today. He's been on this platform previously, back in, I believe it was February, where Sarah brought him on, Sarah Carell, who's the founder of the Power Story, brought him on. And man, that was a thought-provoking, very incredible deep dive on some things that a lot of folks maybe don't understand and aren't cognizant of, but these are important things that we're going to do a little deeper dive on today. So, again, our guest is Ryan Roberts. He served as a Marine. He's the founder of the Journey Home, and he focuses on moral injury. And that's something that, at least for me, since the how we ended in Afghanistan, that really started to drive that home with me. It's something I never really thought much about, but that really, I'm sure we'll talk about that as well. But that was something that has impacted a lot of people, and folks are trying to figure out, what is this? How do I deal with it? How do I understand it? How can I begin healing? That's something that Ryan is an expert at, I would say. And again, we'll talk about that. Uh, Meaning resolution and human systems are also things that he's very good at, and we're going to hop into that. So, welcome aboard, Ryan. We're glad to have you back.
Thanks, Scott. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. And I don't want to be remiss in doing two things here before we get into that. First thing I want to do is welcome Barry, Barry Z. He's my co-host. He is absolutely the half and half thing. He's my other half. He's my podcast wife, as he likes to say. Good to see you, Barry.
Yeah, good to see you. Sorry, guys, for the delay, but the time change really messed us up, and thank God I got up just before 6. So
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
still
that's all
I'm still
good.
trying to emerge from sleep, so I'm all right.
Yeah,
We won't hold it against you.
Yeah, I'm good.
that's right. And that's something, we always somehow this happens to us more than it should, that we because Barry is in Australia, right? So that's the number of
Mm.
time changes, and you have just like you have here, there you have the clock goes forward and back, right? And then
Yeah.
because we are doing this podcast, we do one podcast a month. It's the third Friday of every month. So a time change isn't necessarily going to be in the front of your mind for the podcast. And so anyhow, it happens. It's all good. So, and then the other thing that I don't want to be remiss on is thanking Sarah Carell, who was the founder of the Power Story. If it wasn't for Sarah and the good work that she's done over the past 5, 6 years, we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation with Brian that we're about to get into. So, Sarah's work, it started local, it has gone regional, it's gone across the map here in the United States, and it's global. And that's amazing. And there's a lot of goodness to what she's doing. A lot of folks have jumped on the bandwagon in a good way, and they're providing a lot of insight and a lot of other resources and programs through the Power Story that are helping people. And it's just wonderful to be a part of that, Sarah. Thank you so much, and good to see you today. Okay, so let me do this. I'm going to start out by reading Ryan's bio, and then we're just gonna hop right into this interview. So bear with me for a second while I read this here. Ryan Roberts, MBA, is a U.S. Marine combat veteran and healthcare executive with 2 decades of leadership across community, hospital, and academic medicine. As the founder of The Journey Home, Ryan develops peer-driven restoration frameworks for moral injury, bridging the gap between lived experience and institutional strategy. He serves as a clinical research partner with Baylor College of Medicine and the Menninger Clinic on veteran psychedelic therapy studies and advocates for legislative change as a founding member of the Veterans Mental Health Leadership Coalition. Ryan is dedicated to ensuring veterans are not just recipients of care, but active architects of the policies and programs that they serve. I'll talk about meaningful. Well, outstanding. Well, Ryan, again, we are very happy that you're here today. We've been looking forward to this conversation. As I mentioned in the beginning, you were on the Power Story platform back in February, where at the end we realized, okay, there needs to be at least a part two or more of this. And so that's what today is. Now, we can't really go back too much and recreate what we discussed back in February, but Ryan was good enough to get with Barry and myself on LinkedIn, which is a great platform for connecting with folks. And I'm going to bring up real quick, I'm going to go to that because there was something in there that just really caught my eye when I read through it. He was suggesting some things we could, get into in the interview. And this is meaningful, right? And so of a couple of groups in SCORE, he talks about meaning, belonging, moral coherence, identity, and purpose are not private possessions that can simply be rebuilt through better thoughts. They are shaped and sustained within relational, communal, symbolic, and ecological conditions. And that's a lot, right? But when
That
you
is.
when you think about those things, meaning, belonging, moral coherence, identity, purpose, man, those are things that are so important to people in life and how we operate and how we see the world, how we communicate with people, how we listen. There's just so much wrapped into that. I just really got so much out of just reading that when you sent that. And I'm like, this guy knows what he's doing.
Yeah, at least I can use enough big words to make people think I know what I'm doing. But yeah, I think, this is generated through lived experience. And this is something that, if there's one thing out of the work that I'm doing that I would love to see more of, and I'm far from the only one, but more folks coming forward who have kind of lived through the wound now help researchers and clinicians start to shape the way home from it, right? That's where the journey home came from. It's just this belief that we can be active participants and we should in our healing and moral restoration processes. And it's what allows me to, I think, just speak fluidly about this. I'm not from the outside looking in as an observer. I'm somebody who didn't have the language, who didn't have the tools, who didn't have the access I needed. And now with the gift of hindsight and just life experience, I'm able to kind of put this together as a retrospective look back in the subtype of hopefully like a playbook at the end of the day for people who are searching for the language, they're searching for the models and the relationships. Because, as you shared just in that, that set of kind of core definitions and explanations, meaning is relational, and moral injury, when you're not looking through it only as through a pathological lens, it absolutely can injure the processes of meaning making, right? Just pulling the felt lived experience out of life itself, right, into something that's impactful and meaningful for the individual. And that doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? So it's just, I think, getting people to understand that, meaning isn't just this belief or that slogan, right? Or even a reframing strategy. It is that felt coherence. Coherence just meaning what I believe, what I feel is going to be true in the world is true. Like they meet. There's a coherence between the inner world and the outer world. And when there is that coherence, we're not really in suffering. Things are in a good place, but we need to just remember that meaning is just not individually generated. It's something that happens through relationship, not just relationship with each other, but relationship with being in participation with the world, right? Out there acting and being engaged. And moral injury can take a lot of that away.
Yeah, absolutely. And, something you talked about lived experience, right? There's a difference between, say, being an academic
Mhm.
right? For lack of a better word, and a person who is of the world in terms of, what have you been doing? It's one thing to have knowledge.
Yeah.
It's a very different thing to have experience too. But if you can have both of those things, which is what you bring to the table, you bring the experience, the lived experience, and then the knowledge and the education to bear, which made me think of something a couple of days ago. It may have been yesterday. My wife was looking to post something to hire someone to help us do a couple of things here where we live. And she said, should I say this? And you're looking for someone with the knowledge. And then she
Mhm.
said, or should I say someone with the experience? And I was like, let's go with experience,
Yeah.
because
Well, when you bring knowledge and experience together, you have wisdom
yeah, yeah,
because you can have the
absolutely.
knowledge to do it. And then once you've actually executed on that enough times, then you have the wisdom, right? You have the ability to find signal, right? And
Yeah.
find patterns and things that you wouldn't normally see.
Yeah, and those two things together, like you said, bring wisdom. And just for the task we were looking for, and words mean things. And it
Mhm.
just reminded me of this. I wanted someone that had experience that can come out here, someone who's done the job before that can do it, not someone that has, well, I saw that on YouTube video. I think I can do that. I've got some knowledge. It's like
Yep.
a bit of humor there, but yeah, that's so I do have a question for you. Where did you come up with the name for your organization, The Journey Home? Is there a story with that? I mean, I think
I
I
mean,
can kind of
yeah,
guess, but
yeah. I think it's pretty kind of self-evident, but it truly is. um, it's not the physical journey home being, I was overseas and returning home is hard and transition is hard. All those things are absolutely true. But at the end of the day, what moral injury allowed for me, like, of course, if somebody who is in deep suffering with moral injury at this moment, I'm framing this with 20 years of moving through it and living through it. And I definitely don't want to make it sound like it's this beautiful thing. It's moral injury is devastating and unfortunately quietly devastating. And it often lacks language, right? Which is a real hurdle. Again, with hindsight is key. I can look back on that and say it was an absolute, not just a transformational experience, but in many ways a liberating experience. And it allowed me to really understand who I am at a much deeper level and come home to self and kind of not the lowercase self, right? The ego, but truly like a full embodied sense of self. I feel like mind, body, spirit, all of it is well aligned and now has a lot of coherence. And when you have coherence, you can move to that next step of congruence, right? Which is know what my core values are truly, not just the ones I was brought up with or I inherited through religion or for family or community, but truly when your values are transgressed and you move through moral injury, you have the opportunity to revisit that core value system and truly say, what is most important? What is most true for me? So I was able to get in real contact with that and make sure that I basically shaped my world around what was most important to me. Identify the relationships that were either just extract the job or the role that was just punching the clock. So it really was a full embodied journey home of moving through the wound back to a much truer and probably evolved version of who I am at the end of the day.
Scott, can I add something?
yeah, please, yeah, absolutely, Barry.
Ryan, I think why the work you're doing is so important is the acknowledgement that a moral injury is the deepest wounding of the soul.
Mm.
And when you talk about a moral injury as an embodied wound, I think what you point to the fact and what you're doing is that we're beginning to understand more and more and accept more and more that the words we use in the healing traditionally simply do not reach the depth of the wound that exists within our body. And the fact that you drill in deeper and deeper with your research, it's like you've got to crack through that final crust to get to the almost the soul part where it lives. And
Mhm.
until somebody and the research finds the way back into that place in ways that haven't yet been used effectively, until then people remain lost. It doesn't matter what we do. They may understand the context of the wound, but the wound continues to live. And I think that's the most exciting thing that you bring today, is that you're tapping in at far deeper levels each time we have a talk.
Yeah, and again, like this is you know you're doing the right work when just everything around you just aligns in a way that I couldn't have designed all of this myself. Um, you know, at the time I was suffering with moral injury, you heard in my bio, I spent a great amount of time working in healthcare. And I had a very untraditional, well, I would say traditional on paper pathway, right? As far as kind of moving through the ranks of roles, and ever escalating responsibility. But the lens that I was gifted through mentors as I was moving through healthcare was very different than most people, right? I do have the MBA. That's kind of a check in the box thing. But it was cultivated in a very, very different way and very intentionally by mentors along the way. And um, the particular perspectives, the lenses that I use to look at healthcare are very different. So I would use things like human-centered design in healthcare. I would take a systems level look at understanding all of the parts and pieces of the various systems with from like the clinic level all the way out to the community. But eventually I developed this complex adaptive systems perspective. And that complex adaptive systems is looking at healthcare as if it's this living, breathing organism, right? Where it's just mired with complexity. So these reductionary linear tools and perspectives at looking at healthcare, I think it creates a lot of the friction we experience. But when we look at healthcare as this living, breathing entity, and we take that lens and look at all of the different interactions in that system, I think we start to understand it better, because at the end of the day, it's made up of human beings, right? And we are extremely complex. And to think that we can take a reductionary look at it and understand it and try to control it from the top down is just not possible. And that carried over to my perspectives with moral injury as well, because I do look at it as a complex adaptive systems phenomenon, meaning it's a living, breathing, moving thing, right? It's multi-domain, because it touches so many different aspects of who we are, right? Because it's not just the morality side. It absolutely does have a clinical side to it, right? So we can't take clinical care out of the equation either. It has a role to play, but it's just there's so many registers to it that we needed to, I think, just potentially. And again, I'm not saying I understand it better than anyone else. I'm very honest that I have my theories, I have my perspectives, but I need to bring a lot of humility to this as well. Just because I experienced it, I've helped guide people through it. That's good, right? We're heading in the right direction. Again, like I feel like we're heading in the right direction, but I still have to bring that humility as well to say that the program that I've developed is moving into the clinical trial space now, right? So we'll be doing a pilot at Baylor for the group version of the moral restoration program, which I'm very hopeful about. It's worked on the outside. I'm interested to see how it works when we get it into kind of the academic environment, because I know that environment as well professionally. So we'll see how it withstands. I mean, everything you're speaking to is just the lens that I'm looking at it through, not so much the pathological lens, which again, not saying it's not important. It's just what I believe it's just insufficient. The phrase that I continue to use is it's clinical care is necessary, but it's insufficient. We can reduce the symptoms, but there's these domains that don't regularly get touched in clinical care. They're necessary to actually go through that moral restoration process.
So, Ryan, can you talk to, as you're drilling deeper into this, how you're starting to peel away the layers and get to that complex adaptive system? What's coming up for you, and what do you feel are the modalities, not necessarily the modalities, but the qualities of being and journeying through that you feel will ultimately create the healing that's required? If you could talk to that.
Yeah, I would say and again, this is partly why I think that the academic environment could prove to be a bit challenging. Because when we look at kind of that evidence-based gold standard approach, right, it generally is that randomized control trial type of an environment. There's obviously there's lots of different shades of that in existence, but it looks at things like community, right? That community container, and that's viewed as something that's just, it can be like a confounding variable, right? It's something to control for. When we look at a wound like moral injury, which you can describe it, I guess, as a relational wound in many ways, that it also takes a relational container in order to heal that wound. I should say to restore that wound at the end of the day, because that's where we're moving towards, right? I think we can think of healing often through a clinical lens, but when we use the word restoration, I think that brings up something a little bit different for people. A little bit of a different, say, like even embodied reaction to that. That restoration truly, what I believe, what we're going into the pilot with is that, community is not a nice to have. It's something that's going to be structurally required in order for restoration to occur. And I don't want to spend the full time kind of like maybe unpacking the complex adaptive systems elements of it, because what I'm working towards is the idea that moral restoration is an emergent phenomenon, meaning that it's not something we can top down control or create, but what we can do is we can make sure we've got the right container, being community, right? So the Journey Home program is a 6 to 8 people in a cohort environment over the course of 16 weeks, right? It's a group that progresses together. We can contribute the container, right? So that's one piece of that complex adaptive systems piece that we think is, again, it's not noise, it's not a confounding variable to be controlled. It is structurally necessary. And then once that container is kind of created, the emergent phenomenon is basically created through the group agreeing to and following 3 simple rules. Could potentially, if you want, we can kind of get into what some of those rules are, but following those 3 rules, the emergent phenomenon, the conditions that we're looking need to be present for moral restoration to occur, it naturally comes out of the container. Right? So that's the idea of emergence rather than kind of a prescriptive healing model. It's truly, we set the container. We have what's called an elder and a guide, somebody who has moved through the wound, who's gone through the moral restoration process, who can they're basically an ecologist at the end of the day. They're looking at the conditions that are either present, waning, waxing, or not present in the room, and they're looking for ways to kind of reestablish that in the group. And often, again, that comes back to making sure that everybody is following these 3 simple rules. And that concept of 3 simple rules just comes from the concepts of emergence, right? I would say the classical example that's used is starlings, right? Those birds, you'll see them in those crazy complex patterns of, moving across open fields where there's not one single starling in control of that formation. It's each starling in that group is in that murmur, I guess they call it. It's a murmuration. Each of them are following those 3 simple rules, right? For them, it's about speed, it's about spacing, and it's about not colliding. When they follow those 3 rules, emergent phenomenon occurs where they're moving in these complex patterns and going through all of these different shapes. So that's kind of the classical, I guess, example of emergence, but it's very different from how we look at, I would say, just, traditional Western medical care, where healing is prescribed, right, through a medicine or through an intervention. This is something that's it's a very different approach in a million different ways. But yeah, it's bringing kind of that it's not hiding from the complexity that's present in the wound or in the process. So it's really about establishing those conditions. And when those conditions are present for long enough, we can start to walk people through a process of putting those values back into place. And as we put values back into place, we can start to work on meaning making again. We can start to talk about things like purpose and mission. And then we can, just continue. There, again, it's a 16-week program that goes through quite a bit of different stuff, but it's really just helping people get a language for what's going on, and then really making sure that they are empowered. Because at the end of the day, I don't heal anyone, right? They're willfully coming into this program with the openness for this program to change them. And then our job is to create those conditions and help guide and steward them through that process of restoration.
Okay, so I think that you paint that out really well. And what came to me was that when you talk about the gold standard approaches, I often call that the technicians of the soul first need to come in and drill up to about 100 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Then when you talk about the journey back home into the healing, it's almost like the word that came to me was the mythologist. He creates the mythology of the healing. Can you, there's a lot here that you're unpacking, and we don't have 4 days to drill into it. What are the key components that you feel you want to raise today, whether the 3 rules that live within the container, or whether there are other more critical components that you'd like to bring into the light today?
Yeah, I think we can. I mean, I'm happy to share the rules because, again, they are simple rules and they're intended to be such.
Cool.
Yeah, hey, real quick, I know I'm hopping into the middle of your guys' back and forth here, but I was just thinking about something, and this is very, very basic, right? But I think it might be important. Some folks that will join in later when they see this recorded, uh, depending on what experience they've had in life, maybe they're not understanding what moral injury is, right? They may have a thought about what it might be. So, certainly there are definitions they can look up, but do you have a good boilerplate definition, Ryan, for to
Yeah.
explain that, and then we can get right back into the conversation?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. Yeah, that's a good catch. Because to be honest, there is not an agreed upon definition across at the moment. You'll see different definitions depending on who's doing the research. And the way that I look at moral injury is it's a wound to the moral architecture of self. Right. So when I'm talking about the moral architecture of self, that is your core value system. That is the meaning, the purpose. It's the pieces that make up who you are at architectural level, the internal inside level. It meets the external world. So it's a wound to that moral architecture of self that's caused by what the space calls potentially moral injurious events. PMIE is kind of the abbreviation for that. And that event, what it does is it transgresses or makes irreconcilable a person's deeply held moral beliefs and expectations. So that's, yeah, you basically, as individuals, we cultivate a moral worldview, right? What's good, bad, right, wrong, just, unjust. And what can happen in these events, again, I won't do my full story. If people want to go back and watch the previous video, they can. But I joined the Marine Corps because I was compelled. I had a core value inside of me to protect the innocent. And on 9/11, we know what occurred, and that kind of got me to join. I had no to join the military. I had no family history in it, but I grew up just outside of New York City, so I was really compelled when I saw what happened. So I went to the battlefield. Right, I joined the Marine Corps Infantry. I wanted to go right to the front line and do what I had signed up to do, and I got that opportunity. March 23rd, 2003. My unit was in Battle of Ban Nazariya, and it was there that within the course of 24 hours, we had a horrific friendly fire incident that cost the life of 13 of Marines in my unit. I thought that was the worst I was going to ever see. My job was to go into that vehicle and pick up whatever was left, and it was hit by an A-10 aircraft. I mean, you could have gone in there with a mop. There was not much picking up to be done. And I thought, oh, that's the worst I'm ever going to see. Right? And then within 24 hours, my squad was at manning a checkpoint at a key strategic bridge. I'm in a vehicle, civilian vehicle, rolled through 2 layers of Constantine wire. We engaged the vehicle to stop it before it reached friendly forces. In the front seat were two military-age males with weapons. We thought it was a good stop. As I went to the back seat and opened up the back door, on the floor were 2 children. So I went there to protect the innocent. And by making the right choice in the moment, right, I transgressed that core value set. And what that did was send me on basically a tailspin that just dated over the course of nearly 2 decades before I figured out what moral injury was. And sure, I had PTSD and traumatic brain injury and all of those things, but underneath all of that was this wound that I didn't have language to express. The clinician sitting across from me didn't, they didn't know what it was. They didn't have the language to start talking about some of those deeper layers that Barry's getting to, the spiritual layer, getting to that moral worldview. It just wasn't possible. Neither of us had the language. So I would give my best, go at trying to explain what I was feeling, what I was experiencing, what I wasn't experiencing. And then the clinician would hear it through their lens of pathology, and it would come back as PTSD, depression, anxiety, complex PTSD, where again, going through that treatment, it would reduce some of the symptoms. But there was this emptiness, this hollowness that just would not go away, that I could not fill. And that's just, I don't know how you can fill it in a clinical environment, but that's kind of my basic definition for it. And just a real world example to give people a sense of, okay, like I had that core value and there was this event. Now I have this incredible moral paradox that I can't integrate, that I can't make sense of, because it's not a false belief. Like that guilt the shame didn't need to be there, but the guilt was a sign that I had an intact moral self. I hope you feel guilty if something like that was, but if you can't process, it will turn into shame, and that will weave into your identity, and then you'll have a real hard time coming home.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Brian, thank you for that. That's crystal clear.
Yeah.
And thank you for your service, brother.
Of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was just looking at a, definition. I just Googled, a definition for moral injury, and it absolutely, you're covering everything that it's talking to here, especially this part here at the end. It says, or fails to prevent acts that deeply violate their own moral beliefs or ethical codes, right? How could you have known? All right. But what you said is spot on. So,
Yeah. Yeah. So there's commission, right? That's what I did. There's omission, what I failed to do. But then there's also two others that, I mean, I absolutely believe through the people who I've worked with that they're suffering from moral injury and they witnessed, right? Like what I saw. And then there's also betrayal. And I think that's what you were talking about early on when we were talking about the withdrawal from Afghanistan.
right.
When we put people in this regard and have all the trust in the world, and they deeply violate to something that, obviously it struck a moral chord for you, a value-based chord. Witnessing a betrayal are parts that sometimes people will include it in their definition or their description. But I try to include it all the time because I know enough people who have moved through the wound from witnessing the betrayal that absolutely suffer from what moral injury shows.
Yeah. And, so much of that, the Vietnam veterans didn't understand. I mean, well, of course, they felt what they felt, but they didn't have the context of, what you're talking about today to help them. And then the ability to, look at this and move past it, identifying it, understanding it, and then, doing all the work necessary to get better with that. But that's still something that is so deep.
Mhm.
I love being a Marine. I'd go back. They wouldn't take me now, but I'd go back,
Yeah.
right? But uh, when when I think about service, I was retired as a Marine, once we left Afghanistan, and that just cut to the quick. It's like, man, how on earth, because I enjoy being a Marine. Was was in Iraq, was in combat. In fact, you and I, we talked about this last time. I was with 15th Me. We came up right on the
Hmm.
back end of you guys in on Azaria there. But uh, looking at it away from service and seeing what happened in Afghanistan and just being so infuriated by that, the unnecessary loss of life, if things would have been done differently. And it's not just one thing, right? There were a
Hmm.
number of things that could have been done differently and better. But that really drove home for me uh, how these veterans of Vietnam War, all the stuff that those guys dealt with. And it seemed like we were doing a really good job with that for a while, through the
Hmm.
2000s, because folks were very tuned into supporting their veterans. And then at the, tail end of what happens in Afghanistan, things started to change a bit. Not that folks were, here stateside treating people bad like they were
Hmm.
treating them when they came back from Vietnam, but it was just that whole thing of how we would win engagements, right, decisively, but then we couldn't win couldn't win a war, right? And it kind of came right back to that again, so that's kind of it's a lot of things piled in, to say there at the end. But anyhow, I'm gonna turn this back over to Barry, so you guys can get back into what you were talking about. I just thought it was important to maybe just discuss the thoughts of what moral injury is, the components to that, so we can get back to what you guys were talking
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, no, happy
Yeah,
to.
thanks.
Do you want me to share just a little bit about the simple rules and then we can see where we want to go from there?
Sure.
Yeah, that would be great. And thanks, Scott, because we needed to define that container for people that are not familiar with moral injury. So well jumped in with. So thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
Ryan, yeah.
absolutely.
Those three rules, yeah, that's a good start.
Yeah. So you can look at the simple rules as they're basically a behavioral posture held by everybody in the room. And again, with this being an emergent phenomenon, they don't produce healing directly. What they do is by following these three rules, these conditions that restoration requires start to kind of emerge from the space itself, right? And again, the importance of the guide, the elder, who's again who knows the wounds, the felt lived experience of the wound, who is constantly sense making and engaging with the room to make sure these things are present, helping, I would say, gently redirect. And one more thing that I think may be important for somebody who's maybe in a dark place with moral injury at the moment. These rules, again, I'm saying they're simple. This is with hindsight, right? There are been groups of 8 in the program where not all 8 can simultaneously, each of them carry all 3 rules. They don't have to individually, and I think that's another strength of being in kind of that tight knit cohort group environment is the fact that they can each contribute a bit to make sure that these things are present. The first rule is stay in contact with what's true for you right now. That's another way of just saying your honesty with self, presence over performance. So what's actually alive in you, not just what sounds good, what sounds like progress, what do they want to hear, right? So it's staying present, it's staying true, it's staying authentic, and truly verbalizing what's going on for you in the moment, whether that's something that you're being asked to share or somebody shares and then something really kind of lights up for you in an embodied sense or maybe in the mind. It's just staying true to that and not performing, because that's something that with moral injury, um, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I got very, very good at it. because part of what moral injury did for me was created this sense of what I call ontological homelessness. This this feeling of like not being at home in your own body and your own existence, where you're moving through the world as like a performance. Right? Really big, meaningful moments like the birth of my son. Like I know contextually, this is a big deal. I should feel all of these things. And while I can know that, I can't feel it. Right? This is that meaning making ability being offline, right? That sense of the being in the experience just wasn't there. Right. That's something that's the devastating part about moral injuries. Like I can't go back and get that back. It takes that from you, right? It takes moments from you because you can't be an active participant in reality, right? So again, while some of these rules sound simple, they're not simple for somebody with. Again, there's degrees and shades of moral injury, right? But for many, it's something that's extremely challenging, although it sounds simple. Because again, like I can read a room like a sociopath, right? And anticipate what emotions I needed to I didn't feel anything. I could mimic whatever I needed to. Right. So for somebody with moral injury, that simple rule can still be challenging. So again, that's a rule about honesty with self. And then there's let what others share land on you. That's just receptivity. It's not passive listening. It's being present and having genuine contact. Right? Because when we hear things that are sometimes challenging for us, make us feel a certain way about our values or something we've done or we failed to do. What others share, we can put on armor and we can deflect. We can keep that away. Not we just be like, I don't want to sit with that. What we're asking you to do in this space is to let it land. And whatever you're going to feel, but let it land. That comes with quite a bit of fear. So again, simple rules, not always easy to. And then the third one is we're always moving towards what matters, not away from what hurts. Okay, so moving towards what matters, not away from what hurts. And that's real courage. Right? So that's action that's oriented by values. It's not avoidance. It's like the question shifts from like, what can I tolerate to what matters enough to move towards. Again, for most people in the room, probably not a challenge. For somebody who is in that dark space where they're moving through life mechanically, those simple rules can be challenging, right? So we carry them together, and that's where the 7 conditions emerge from. I should say maybe just one thing before we can wherever you feel is best. There's this I would say it's like a meta rule, or even maybe I would say a meta rule, which is you've got to have a willingness to be changed. You could call that surrender. People sometimes confuse surrender and defeat. Right? And you can see both in somebody who's struggling with moral injury, where they're just beat up and they're like, I just give up, whatever, I'll do whatever I got to do. Not enough in this environment. You've got to be willing and active participant. Can't bring you through the process of moral restoration. Like, as much as I would love to, there's nothing I can do for you. So you've got to be not in a place of defeat, but in a place of ultimate surrender, where you're willing to be changed by whatever's going to happen. Because it's not always, it doesn't feel great, right? As we heal, as we restore, it can feel at times that things are getting worse until it gets better. So there's kind of that meta condition or that meta rule that we need people to be able to step into the space. Again, we can want it for you. We can guide and we can help, but we can't do it for you.
Ryan, I mean, those rules were profound. I mean, I was writing as you were talking, and I think I can now see the context of one, the healing has to happen in the context of others. because they provide the skin of the container and the presence of shared journeying, to have an elder. It's so mythological. I mean, I grew up with a lot of Greek myths, and that descent into hell, and the guide that takes you across the river and tells you you're going to meet a three-headed dog, and then this is going to happen in the darkness. And then the very facts that, one, it's about presence, and can you allow yourself to be truly visible in the presence of others? That the second one is fear. Are you willing to really open to the fear within yourself, the receptivity to others around you, and the honesty of being who you need to be at that point? And then never losing sight that you've got a goal in mind, which is moving towards that which is not yet known, that which is beyond your experience. So there's no internal roadmap for that. So the actual interior map is created through the process of the journeying with others in community and with the elder following alongside you. Where to from there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think we can go a lot of directions. I'm happy just to maybe continue down that path since we're following that thread. If we want to, yeah, I can share a little bit about the conditions we've found to be consistent experience. Maybe I'll say one thing before we move into that, because you touched on it. Well, maybe two things. What's alive for me? One is the thing get asked, what's a simple thing that I can do for somebody with moral injury, who's moving through moral injury? This generally comes from like a spouse or brother or sister, like a close person. I just say witnessing is one of the most powerful things we can do for anybody. I think we're naturally inclined, most of us as human beings, to want to rush in and to help, right? To help explain away. But as you heard in my story, like it's not a logic problem. I didn't have some skewed way of looking at what I went through. This huge moral paradox of I did the right thing and I caused this to happen. I transgressed my core value system by doing the right thing. If you put me back there now, I probably would do the same thing. Right? Like the truth of it was in the front seat were two military-age males. I have no idea what they intended to do, but they drove through two layers of barriers to get to us. Right? They knew what was going to happen. Were they doing it to psychologically damage us, knowing that what would be in the back seat? Maybe. There is evil. No doubt about that. The idea of witnessing is just not rushing into somebody, just being with somebody truly, honestly in the moment and just seeing them where they're at, wanting for them to be better, wanting for them to move through it, simply just being with them in the moment, letting them know that you're there and you'll always be there, and just witnessing them in all of it. Something that it's nothing, right? Other than us having to fight that urge to rush in and to kind of be a savior to somebody and pull them out of the pain. The truth is, like, you need that pain, the pain, the trauma, the moral injury, all of it in the right environment with the right guide and elder, with the right conditions, and be the catalyst. Moral injury is the seed and the fruit. It's both things. Because it can truly be a door to, like, you'll never learn in normal day-to-day life. You'll learn on the battlefield. Those are lessons you can't replicate in the environment. That combination of knowledge and experience. That's wisdom that I think is lost. We transition people out of the military and ask them to, like, just take off the uniform and hang it up. You can do that, but that identity part, that warrior archetype that was constructed underneath that uniform, you can't hang that up. And we shouldn't ask people to do that. It's about, we put these men and women into positions where they can help steward our country, hopefully in a much better way, because nobody wants to see less war than people who have been there and done that. But I think, that's something that I think we've lost way kind of as a society. I remember coming home to a parade, because we had lost so many guys that we were the first unit to come back to the United States right after the Iraq invasion. So when we got back, we had like miles and miles of parade people waving flags and holding signs. And we all knew, like, well intended, but for people who had just experienced and potentially did the unthinkable, we surely didn't feel like we deserved a parade. And that's just, I think society wants to help its veterans in really positive, meaningful ways, but that moral burden that we carry is hard to describe. And when we're met with a parade, when we feel like what we should be met with is like a jail sentence, it can land in the wrong way. So, maybe touching on what you shared about just looking back at how cultures brought warriors home in antiquity. Again, I'm not saying let's go back to the way things were. I'm happy with modern medicine and what we have today. I think culturally and socially, we can learn a lot. And a lot of what I brought into this program is stuff that stood the test of time. Like, these are just basic things about getting back to self, getting back to community. Cultures done really, really well, because, we don't bring people all the way through that journey home. My hope is that, societally, we can learn a lot. Society's helped carry that moral burden, right? It wasn't the individual alone, it was the community. War happens a million miles away now, and we see it on our TVs and on our phones. We don't feel it as they used to feel. It would happen in their backyard. They'd be participating in getting the people ready for war, building something that helps them war, participating. And we've lost touch with that. And I think it's part of the challenge that we find ourselves in now. It's like, we join so our family doesn't have to feel it, but then we come home to a family that doesn't understand it, and it's like, how do you rectify that? There's no good way out of that.
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah,
Ryan. And what sorry, Barry,
okay.
what you were just saying there and tying it into what Barry had commented on, the cultural aspect of bringing warriors home. We have lost so much wisdom in that because, we always, and probably most societies think that we're a little better than those guys. We've learned things. We're more advanced, and it's a dangerous place to be. Because if we were at that level, we might not be having as many veteran suicides, right? This is what this absolutely is getting to in my mind, right? I'm an easy, simple guy, but what everything that you just talked about, first thing that I start thinking about is, man, look at the suicide rate we have here. Look how high it is. This whole moral injury thing is driving a lot of that. I can guarantee that that's what's happening. And yeah, what you said was so profound. And I just want to also jump in real quick with your three rules. That's phenomenal. I mean, that really opens up the mind here, and that was so important. So thank you for going over that.
I mean, I agree. I think that's, the point about the veteran suicide is, I call this kind of the invisible, what's driving that, because, moral injury doesn't cleanly fit into the clinical paradigm. And I think and again, this is just a personal kind of one belief, but I feel like we keep trying to ask the medical paradigm to be more than it is. Somebody who worked in it for a long time, it's like we take a blowtorch to the edges and we try to stretch it further and further and further and say it's an access problem. I mean, I live and work around this community, and I'm a member of the community, and they continually cite the issue, but we continue to get better access. People who get that access, maybe they have slightly lower suicide rates. That's the win. right? But to think that, okay, there's 60% of the suicides didn't have contact with the VA for 2 years. The automatic thought when you're in that paradigm is we need to get that 60% in and protect them. The truth is that 60% may not need it. They need something, but they don't need more medicine. They don't need another intervention. What they need is to restore meaning, purpose, connection, values, these other pieces that we need the clinical care to be able to stabilize people, to get them to a point where I can bring them into this environment and do the work that needs to be done. Again, not just me, just using this as an example. I just think we're trying to carry that paradigm too far. We just have to start, what I think, is to develop complementary paradigms like community, and make sure that that gets done with rigor as well, because I think that's where community can start to lose a bit of. Because not every community program is well designed and well intentioned and well executed. Neither is every single clinical program. It was just not true. I think the community could use a bit of work on a lot of programs too, to make sure they are done with rigor, and make sure they're intentional and well run, and they make space for clinical care. Right? Because my program, if they're not, they have to be actively engaged with someone, whether therapist, because my scope ends. I know where my scope ends, and if somebody is trending in that direction, I'm going to make sure they get to that responsible level of care, because this work can dig up stuff. It could end up in a place where not competent and capable to give them the support and help they need. Do it in conjunction with the clinician and therapist. Worked right next to them for decades. I can speak the language. We can have the conversations, but it's necessary. So, but I think that the paradigm problem, the paradigm insufficiency problem, is partly what's driving this suicide crisis, or meaning wounds are that.
Yeah,
Amen.
Ryan, spot on. And I think what came up for me was that whole concept of witnessing, which is actually critical. Because if you think about witnessing and then you go back to the elder on the journey with others, it's really a quality of intentional, heart-focused presence. It doesn't get in front of people. It doesn't feel the need to affirm them and tell them they're doing well. It doesn't have the need to make suggestions or come up with tools that people can use. So there are two things that come from there. The one is why, despite so many veterans and first responders going into supportive therapy, do they not heal? And maybe in there is the question that, are we too busy diagnosing, treating, and becoming, and still getting stuck in the technicians of the soul work? Do we need to learn the quality of witnessing? Because it's a learned thing in many ways, because you almost have to override the instinct that we'll use this modality or this gold star modality. Well, the modality then determines the journey. It's not a witnessing. The second thing I think that comes up for me is, and here is a classic, the power of our story. We are sitting today in the power of our story. It's not about any of us trying to affirm the other. It's not about any of us trying to come up with smart suggestions that can help. It's just the quality of listening and being and sharing from the points at which we are along our own journeys. So that witnessing it's a simple word, but man, it's a complex thing that is really being betrayed. That word is betrayed at a 360-degree angle.
Yeah, and I mean it's such a powerful thing, but I appreciate the attention you're giving it, because I think it can be both oversold and undersold, and a lot of it has to do with the way that it's, I guess, taken up, right? The word itself and what it means and what it could potentially do for people. It often gets overlooked and undervalued.
Well, it's attunement, isn't it? Right. It's an attunement. And attunement is not quite knowing what you're going to do from moment to moment, but you sense into it. And then with attunement, you know exactly what sound to make. It's like an orchestra.
Mhm.
S- So I don't know how are we with time, Scott, in terms of
Yeah,
because we could
we're
spend it.
we're just over an hour now. I was thinking the same thing, but I do want to jump real quick on the back end of uh, the witnessing part. I think that is so absolute necessary because a lot of folks need that, right? That's very consequential to what they're going through, and that's what we're trying to do a bit here with the Power story going to the VFWs. So, we're doing with Solana Beach VFW, here in SoCal, we're having these Thursday morning coffees, where it's coffee and conversation. You show up, have a cup of coffee and just, hang out together. And my role in that is to listen, is to be there and to listen to what they have to say, to give them space, whether it's a 20-minute conversation or one that might go on for a couple hours. Doesn't matter. You need to be there to do exactly what you just said. And it's funny. I mean, that's what I wanted to do, right? And now reading what you just said, I feel so much better about the fact that I was doing that, right? And it wasn't that, I figured it out. It's just it seemed like the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And that's I I'm really glad that you brought that up because that's a big deal. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd like to, and I don't know what you think, but I think because it's such a complex journey, it's easy to get lost and forget each of the steps we're looking at.
Mhm.
Um, I think in many ways we're at the gates of hell, and maybe there's a better word to use, but it can be perceived. The darkness
Mhm.
can feel like hell. Um, and we've formulated what the skin is, the elder, the group. There's a tension to getting to that gate. There's a tension moving beyond the gate. There's a tension to coming home. You cannot get home without a tension.
Mhm.
And it's a tension as in the building up of forces within one and between others and yourself. And it's a tension to the moments, each moment that you take your step with the other. I just wonder, I mean, there certainly need to be more conversations to go from step to step to step. I wonder if this is not a good time to open to questions because we've really clarified the beginning of that journey in an extraordinary way. Just, I can see it in front of me now. Scott, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think just based on the time, that's probably a good call
Okay.
because, again, we want to be a good steward. Those that will hear this later, Ryan's got a bunch of folks at his home, family.
Yeah.
There's a graduation that's going on. You know, he's a Marine. He'll be here until until we're
But we're
gone.
done.
But we want to absolutely honor the fact that this is something that's important in his life, and being present for things like that is important. So I think that's a good thing. And maybe we just go on to a number three, and bringing Ryan back in, and we'll continue this. I think that's a good idea.
We could do
Well,
that.
4, 5, 6, 6, 7, and indefinitely as we journey with him.
Yeah,
So Ryan, I want to,
absolutely.
from personally, I want to say thank you. I don't think I've ever been in a situation where I can see the pieces of the puzzle coming together so clearly. I've seen random components, but when you envisage the journey with the elder and the three rules that you talk about, I can actually visualize it happening. There's almost a
Mhm.
sense of preparation and readiness when you just know that. So that was extraordinary, and I want to say thank you.
You're very
Paul, I
welcome.
know you've been very patient and had your hand up. What's coming up for you?
Yeah, while Paul is, getting ready to come off mute, I just want to say this really woke you up, Barry. Man, you are in the zone, brother.
It took, man, my weeks are, by the time I get to weekend, I'm cooked. So
Yeah.
it took a while for the engine to turn over. So
No, but it worked. I mean, this is absolutely it got where it needed to be. That's good stuff.
thanks. Okay, Paul, what's on your mind?
I have a question for Ryan, but before I ask the question, I want to give you the liberty to answer as you see fit or not answer at all if you don't want to, because this is not a judgmental question. It is a question out of curiosity.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned that in an encounter with a Jeep or a Humvee or whatever it was, you opened the back door and found a child in there. And so my question is, and I've been in a similar situation, although not with that degree of shock in it. Do you have any idea, or do you recall what prompted you to open that back door? And I ask
Training.
that in response to the fact that all of the activity was up front,
Mhm.
and there you were.
Yes, sir. Yeah. So we've gone through similar, I would say, mock scenarios in preparation for the deployment. As you know, being a veteran, and you go through these a million times, this dry run to where it's, things happen, not because you're thinking of them. It's habitual at that point. And I understood my position in the line as we moved up to the vehicle. I knew that the two guys in front of me were going to go to either side, driver and passenger door in the front. And once that was secured, because they had line of sight in there, we would continue to sweep the vehicle to make sure no explosives, no. So my role was, once that the second man in the line secured the driver's side door, my job was to go to the back and to check the back seats. It was at that time I found it was a little boy and little girl. Both, again, memory is a bit fuzzy of it, but both under the age, I would say, of 8, like 6 and 4 years old is what I remember. And me being on that side of the vehicle, I picked the young boy up, did kind of the battlefield triage right there in the moment, and realized that he's got his wounds. I'm not going to be able to stop the bleeding. So picked him up and got him to a vehicle, and I rode in that vehicle to get him to the medical evacuation state where they'd have higher level of care. But within just a few minutes of being in the back of the vehicle with him, I realized he was just having agonal breathing. So he had already kind of succumbed to the injuries. His lungs were still having those, spasms. So he passed on the way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sabine.
Yes, hi. I would like to add some of the German perspective. As you know, when I told my story, I said that we as Germans stand on the wrong side of the history, and that makes it extremely difficult to grieve and to integrate our own wounds. And for me, as a descendant of a World War II participator, I carried a huge amount of that grief, and I suppose also of moral injury my grandfather experienced during his participation on the siege of Leningrad. And what I found out was that we need a very paradox thing that allows us to grieve and to integrate. And this was the paradox thing was that we could learn this from the people who we once tried to exterminate. And it was the exactly other side. I had the great opportunity to take part in a project, a third generation project of encounters of children of the Third Reich, and also the survivors' children. And that was a very moving thing. We had an Israeli therapist, and for me, he was a mentor, and I think he fits exactly the rule of the elder you talked about. And this person was a very strong person, because he was so brave to step into the land, into the learned and to confront himself with the people who tried to exterminate his own people. And he questioned us what happened in our families. And he was the one who breaks the silence into our families and also into us. And this was a very moving moment because in the encounters we experienced that the deep wounds of the others, and that helped us to identify our own wounds. That was a unbelievable process, I think. And I think my question is how do integrate, for example, situations when you maybe face situations with heavy guilt? And is there something you could tell your veterans about guilt and to deal with guilt? What would you tell?
I would say two things. If I'm not answering your question directly, please redirect me. There's layers to this, right? There's complexity to this, but I would say we didn't get into it, I guess, on this call. We did on the previous one, but there's the architecture piece of how kind of a meaning gets, the meaning injury happens, how we get disconnected from purpose. I won't go into that entire cascade, but I think understanding that cascade kind of frames my answer a little bit. But people can absolutely go back to the previous video, and I think we were pretty deliberate on unpacking the moral injury cascade from the event all the way to what could potentially be meaningless existence resulting in suicidality. With moral injury, I think it's important to maybe isolate three pieces. There's the moral paradox part. It's the part where I explained there's the act that I took that it was the right thing, and it still resulted in me transgressing the core value that got me. That doesn't, still to this day, is integrated in there. I don't know how to get to the point where that's integrated. It's something that I carry, and I've gotten stronger, and I've distributed the weight amongst many others who support me in this process, in life in general. They know it about me. They know what I've experienced, and they see it in me. They see aspects of it that's healed. They see aspects of it that still struggle and carry that. And I don't know. I mean, I'm 23 years removed from the event, and that's extremely heavy. But again, I think it's not so much a matter of integrating that. It's just getting stronger and finding people who can help you carry that box that may never be integrated. But as far as the guilt, I would say guilt is one of the guilt and grief are some of the, I would say, the most powerful in making that that process from values transgression to suicidality. Like what makes that happen at an accelerated rate is an accumulation of things like guilt, grief, moral outrage. Those are the things that will drive people in that direction. So the earlier you can start to work on the guilt, the better. But that said, again, it's something, right place, right time, right people around you, because a lot of the people, just think how challenging it would be. And I don't even have one of the more heartbreaking stories that you could hear. For people to feel safe enough to open up and share what they've gone through and what they've potentially done or didn't do. When you can't speak about it, moving and integrating guilt isn't. What I would encourage is recognizing the guilt before the guilt becomes hardened shame. The best thing you can do for moral injury. Say that understanding how challenging what I just said is. It may not even be accessible for some. I think we're all going to be in a different place and need a different level of support to make that integration of guilt happen. I can tell you when guilt doesn't get addressed, it absolutely does turn. And I think the experience we have in the system we currently have probably drives it at meaning I came home with the wound, entered a system. I didn't have the language. They didn't have the language. So it never really got identified out. It was just the elephant in the room all of the time. What got addressed was things like the PTSD, brain injury symptoms, all of that got addressed and called out and treated. And over time, with things like somatic therapy and psychedelic assisted therapy, it improved on paper. So what happened was they're looking at me and telling me you're better. And I'm like, I am as far from good as I can possibly be. Symptomatically, I'm better. I'm having less panic attacks, having less migraines, maybe not abusing alcohol like I was, still not having a connected existence. I have that experience of being in the room when my son is born, being at my wedding, and all of these big life events where I know I'm supposed to feel something emotionally and I can't make meaning out of any of that, can't be connected. What that does, you're being told you're getting better, but experientially you're going in the other direction. You stop looking around and you start looking in the mirror and saying that it has to be me to be the problem. And then that guilt became shame, and shame starts to weave into your identity. And then what you did becomes who you are. And then you're driving at 100 miles an hour down that cascade towards suicidality because you see that you've exhausted the options in the existing medical system. Nobody sees you for what you're up against. They don't hear you because you don't have the language and they don't have the questions. Things like moral injury, even with the conversations we're having now, it doesn't get screened for like PTSD gets screened. We're good at finding those fear-based wounds. We can't even agree on a definition, and then we're trying to apply those fear-based wound interventions to a moral wound and potentially making it worse. But again, this guilt part is in the shame. That shame becomes your identity. And when that happens, really, that's a place to walk someone back from. A 16-week program gets people to a much better place. But this involvement in this community is in perpetuity. We're all doing this work together for potentially the rest of our lives, right? Because we're getting back meaning back online and purpose back online and service to the community back online. But it's much more than a 16-week journey. I hope that answers your question about the guilt.
Yes, that makes sense, Ryan. I think the most important experience for me was that I had the feeling that we were not judged by the other side. And I think this is absolutely important in that process that you get the feeling they were eager to know what happened inside our families. And this was a real and a true drive from this group we encountered. And I think this is the most important thing, not to go in revenge and not to stay stuck, but to be open. And this is very painful for both sides. It's really painful, but you see the suffering of the other side, and this helps you to understand your own misery. And I think this is the process where healing could take in, where the healing takes place. So, and this is, I think, to provide the space is the elder is necessary, and this must be really a very strong person and a person who has the experience and to work through this wound. And I think this is necessary, and you didn't have a chance when you didn't have this elder person. And the willingness, I think that's the second point you say, you pointed out, that the willingness that the people in the room have the will to take part in this process, not to take revenge, not to avoid, not to get absolution. This is not the question. The question is understanding and be there and be present. And this yes, and this is what helped for me, this very important thing. And I experience it here in this format as well.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm glad you brought it up. I mean, it's a great question. And it's obviously so happy that you were able to find your form of that. But I think also what you're speaking to is the fact is a peer community, right? Which I may be, I'm thinking it's implied, but I think it's important to call. These are the left and right of you are people who've been there, done that, and that they understand everything with just being in the military, being away from all of they understand all. And it I mean it's this continual process of like when a veteran speaks and they share maybe how moral injury is impacting their relationship with their wife. And then you see all of the people like, yeah, me too. I thought I was the only one. Because a lot of these things you just think it's you. It's in your head. You think you're a bad person. And the truth is that we're all experiencing it, right? And having those peers who have been through it and done it. um, Again, why I say that community it's not a nice thing to be required for this restoration process to occur.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Sabine. Before you get to Rich, Ryan, I'd also like to, what comes to me as well is that the journey back home is not about getting better, because when we get better, we become complacent. We think we healed. I think on the journey, it's about learning to interweave with the various parts of your wounds that you carry. And at the end of the journey, it's not that it's gone, but what's left is integrated. It's with you. It's still a weight in your backpack. But that's the gift of the journey, because that weight, that residual weight, is what keeps us alive and nourished. It continually draws attention that there's always work to be done. It maintains our humanity and our compassion. And maybe that's something that we can address, because there's such a mythology around getting better. 10 sessions, you'll be better. Medication will cure you. We forget that there has to be that little bit of weight left. There has to be something left in that backpack. Otherwise, we forget too quickly. Rich.
Ryan, thank you for your service and your work at Baylor, uh, and another excellent and thought-provoking session. Uh, I shared something a few days ago with Sarah that I've been struggling with for decades. It had shame, guilt, and a moral aspect to it. Um, but what I want to say to you is, when you talked about that parade, that triggered a thought in my head, the way you thought about the parade, right? And then I said to myself, there are probably veterans out there that when somebody says to them, "Thank you for your service," have the same reaction.
Mhm.
Do you think?
100%.
Yeah,
I don't know how many times I've made that comment kindly to people because I just want them to think about potentially who they have in front of them because it's well intentioned,
yeah, right.
right? But how it lands is obviously dependent on where they're at and what work they've done, and how well they're able to receive that. And that for many veterans, it can be extremely challenging to hear.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, the first time I heard it, somebody, a civilian telling me in law enforcement, it was wow, you know, well, thank you, because you don't hear that.
Yeah.
But then like I said, when you mentioned the parade, it took me back to World War II with the ticker tape parades and the confetti in New York City and, at the end of World War II. And then I thought about that, your parade analogy, and I said, wow, I bet you there are veterans out there, if you say thank you for your service, that are going to be have that same thought.
They do, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Rich, I was thinking the very same thing. That's the first thing that popped into my head too. And then from there, it just rolled on to, what I brought up about, making that connection between struggles and what people do, when they wind up giving up, right? But it just seems so clear to me. And so, okay, let's see here. Any other questions from folks that are watching us live here? If so, we can do that real quick. Okay, so let's do this. Then we're gonna wrap it up here. I thought for the folks that are here live, we're gonna say goodbye. But if you want to hang around for a minute or two after the recording is turned off, that's fine. 'Cause sometimes folks wind up leaving right when we're saying goodbye, and they maybe miss an opportunity for a behind the scenes thing here. So just wanted to say that up front here. Barry, you have any last thoughts?
No, I just thank you. I mean, thank you to everybody. Thank you to Ryan. I mean, this is the most exciting journey. I look forward to as we continue it. It's an absolute gift. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and with that, Ryan, I'll turn it over to you for your closing thoughts. Then what you want to leave us with, and then I'll close this out.
Yeah. Um, Closing thoughts. I think we just need to just continue the conversation and help people who may not recognize that not everything that veterans are up against is I feel like we live in a time where everything gets put under that lens, and this idea of these combat veterans being broken, just it's not the truth I see. We need to make space to recognize that who we are, that not going to cleanly fit in a medical model. It's not about getting VA care. And again, it's never to minimize those things, right? I'm a big proponent of people getting the care they need from the right person. It's why I've intentionally built a program that can hopefully carry, or at least create a collaborative relationship between all of the entities that are necessary. But just the last thing a veteran needs is another diagnosis added to their chart, another intervention they need to go do. They simply sometimes need to be in a community container for people who understand what they're up against and what their experience have been like and how that impacts who they are and what they do and how they view the world. And just being more intent about creating more of these intentional and thoughtful community containers that can be with people in perpetuity. It's not just a 10-week program. It is, as Barry was saying, you don't cross and you're healed. My definition of healed is whole. It's complete, and I don't know if we ever really get there. And I guess we didn't get into it, but I mean, a big part of my journey has also been, I would say, more related on the faith side, because it's interesting that people with, I would say, like a strong belief in a God source, whatever you want to call it, you have a strong spiritual framework, and it's kind of a double-edged sword and moral injury, because you can turn away from the thing that can actually help you get towards restoration because of the shame that comes with what you've done. Sometimes that faith and that belief and that community that comes with it can be exactly what you need to kind of get over that, to get towards restoration. Like, we haven't touched on it in these conversations. I think that's another important thing for people who are going through moral injury to recognize this. People in the faith community who can truly walk you through things, because there are examples and many traditions lens, where you can understand moral injury through a different lens. And you could potentially repair that side of thing, hopefully catalyze your healing and your restoration. It's an important part that I think doesn't really get discussed. Those are the two big things that I would encourage the conversation to continue around, is the community of it, and then understanding that for those with strong faith and belief on that side, that it can kind of be that double-edged sword, but to lean into that community and lean into that side of your life, because I think there's a lot of positive that can come restoring.
Yeah, Ryan, that's a wonderful way to leave us and to, point us down the path of the next thing that we should, bring you back here to discuss in some detail. I couldn't agree with you more on everything you said. Uh, the part about veterans being, not being fragile and broken, I think is a very important concept for folks to understand. A number of months back, we had Kevin Smeagol come on here. He's a retired Marine, and he has a organization called Zero Mills. And when we were talking with him, when Barry and I were interviewing him, he made it a point to bring that up and talk to some level of detail on that, because it is easy for folks outside of the military to think that, because that's what it's a lot of what they see, right? And I don't think you touched on it, not necessarily that folks are intending, understanding what it means to always be looking at someone like they're weak, or, they're fragile. That's not what we want folks thinking, because it's not
Right.
true. Now, there are some folks that have challenges, absolutely, right? But yeah, a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. And the issue with faith. The only thing I'm going to say about that is amen. And then the second thing I'll say about that is it is a walk, right? It's a spiritual walk, but getting back to what Barry was saying, and then you reconfirmed it, and your closing comments was, this is a continual thing, right? You walk in the spirit, and then you walk alongside your brothers and your sisters. So I think that's a great way to end it. It gives us something to look forward to, and of course, we can talk about when we're going to do that. I just want to, as Barry said, thank you so much for your time today, for this second shot at you here. For all the folks that were here live, appreciate the fact that you cared enough to come on. We have folks that are in other states, folks that are in other countries, like Sabine here. And for the folks that will see this in the recording, thank you for wanting to hop on. And I hope that you're hearing this at the end, which means that you stayed for the whole recording. This is good stuff. We are so happy that we have this platform and that we can have these conversations. These are important things that we need to hear and pay attention to, and listen and figure out, maybe what can we do? What can we help with? We're always absolutely willing to have more folks, come under the umbrella here. And so with that said, everyone, thank you so much. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next time on the Veteran Conversation.